All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. I want you to imagine for a second that you're literally a fly on the wall in the ancient Indian city of Shravasti. Now, we usually picture the absolute earliest Buddhist communities just, existing in this state of constant, serene meditation. But the reality? Well, reality is always a little bit messier than that. Today, we're going to look really closely at a series of fascinating ancient texts. And as you'll see, they show the Buddha acting not just as a profound spiritual guide, but honestly, as a highly practical crisis manager who was constantly having to put out the fires of some very relatable human dramas.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question. What actually happens when holy monks cause a massive public scandal? Because the truly wild thing here is that some of the most strict and revered ancient monastic rules, they didn't just fall from the sky. No, they were born directly out of intense PR nightmares, local town gossip, and some incredibly petty community disputes. We're going to basically step right into these specific life scenes as they unfold and see exactly how the Buddha navigated the whole shebang.
So let's jump right into part 1, the riverboat scandal.
Let's actually set the scene here. Listen to the whispers of the ancient villagers. Picture a beautiful, winding river. You can actually hear the rhythmic splash of the oars and the creaking of the wood. A boat floats by. But instead of this peaceful, meditative silence, it is just filled with a group of 6 monks and nuns. Now, these guys were a controversial faction associated with a monk named Devadatta, and they're traveling together, they're laughing loudly, joking around, just causing a massive scene. Obviously, the local laypeople on the riverbank see this and the gossip starts instantly. The optics are just terrible. The locals assume the absolute worst, completely undermining the perceived purity of the entire monastic order.
And man, the fallout was immediate. An ascetic monk, a guy who genuinely preferred a strict, quiet life, heard this terrible gossip spreading like wildfire through the town. Appalled, he went directly to the Buddha. And the Buddha, stepping right into that role of a wise community manager, called a gathering. He directly questioned the offending monks, he confirmed the rumors were true, and he realized he had to act really swiftly to protect the image and the integrity of the community.
So the Buddha's solution was incredibly pragmatic. He instituted a very specific rule. Monks and nuns were officially banned from making appointments to travel up or down the river together on the same boat. It was classified as a pachatiya, which is an offense that requires formal confession. But, and this is crucial, he also carved out some highly logical, real-world exceptions. If they just needed to ferry directly across the opposite bank, totally fine. If there was a sudden danger, or say the boat was just drifting away, the rule was suspended. It wasn't about blind restriction at all. It was about managing public perception while remaining, actually practical for daily life.
All right, moving from the river to the kitchen. Part 2, drama at the dinner table.
Now, if you thought ancient monastic life was somehow totally free from high school-level clique rivalry, you'd be wrong. Imagine a bustling ancient kitchen. You've got the clinking of dishes, the heavy smell of rich spices in the air. A wealthy layman has prepared an absolutely exquisite feast, and he's invited the Buddha's 4 greatest disciples, huge figures like Kasyapa and Sariputra. But there was a highly manipulative nun named Thulananda who frequented this household. She actually approached the layman's wife with this venomous whisper, basically telling her she had invited the wrong crowd, totally dismissing these revered masters as the small monks. She insisted the family should have instead invited the big dragons, which, by the way, was her personal pet name for Devadatta's controversial rule-bending faction.
Well, the drama escalates quickly. The layman actually catches Thulananda right in her manipulative lie. He is red-faced, just furious that she's trying to redirect his family's spiritual offering. Right there in his own home, he kicks her out into the street, shouting at her and even threatening to treat her like a common thief. And get this, the highly respected monk Kasyapa happens to overhear this entire humiliating exchange. The situation is incredibly messy, and once again it is brought right before the Buddha to untangle.
The Buddha's verdict here is beautifully nuanced, and it's designed specifically to preserve the purity of giving. The new rule simply states that monks cannot eat food if a nun has used praise or manipulation to procure it for them. The donations have to be entirely voluntary, completely free from any internal politics. But again, look at the exceptions. If the layperson had already planned to invite them way before the nun ever meddled, or if the food was just everyday family cooking anyway, the monks wouldn't be penalized. It is surgical rulemaking, aimed precisely at the bad behavior without ever punishing the innocent.
Which leads us to part 3, and honestly, this is a real tearjerker, a poor boy's feast.
This is the story of a destitute orphan boy who hears a rumor that feeding the Buddha and his monks will basically guarantee you a rebirth in a heavenly realm. So, desperate for a better future, he begs a wealthy master for a job. He initially asks for 1,000 coins in exchange for a full year of grueling labor. But what's amazing is that this boy actually possesses immense inherent karmic luck. By month 1, his mere presence brings his master triple the usual business profits. By the end of the year, his master's storehouses are literally overflowing. Yet the boy humbly settles for just 500 gold coins, pouring every single penny of it into preparing a magnificent once-in-a-lifetime feast for the monks.
But here is where the tragedy strikes. It just so happens to be a major festival day in Sravasti. That entire morning, lay people have been eagerly offering the monks rich pork and dry rations on the street. So, by the time the monks finally arrive at the orphan boy's house for his hard-earned feast, they are completely full. Despite the boy's desperate pleading, the monks simply refuse to eat his exquisite food. The poor boy, realizing his entire year of agonizing, sweaty labor might be wasted and his one chance at heaven lost, just breaks down and weeps bitterly right there in the dirt.
It's an absolutely heart-wrenching scene. But the Buddha, who is observing this from afar, steps in with profound empathy. He personally approaches the weeping boy and comforts him. Then he turns to his monks and issues a very strict command. They must eat. He essentially forces them to honor the immense, backbreaking sacrifice this kid made, and he assures the orphan directly that his pure intentions have absolutely secured his rebirth in heaven. And then, right as this tense meal concludes, we get this magic number popping up again, 500. Literally just as the monks finish what they can, exactly 500 starving ocean merchants arrive in Sravasti, having narrowly survived a really perilous journey. They are completely desperate for food.
So, the merchants discover the boy's incredible leftover feast, and the karmic payoff is immediate. To buy the leftovers, the lead merchant steps up and drops a jewel worth 100,000 coins into a large copper bowl. You can practically hear the heavy clink of the gemstone hitting the metal. The second merchant drops one worth 90,000. The third, 80,000. They fill the entire massive bowl with priceless jewels, freely giving it all to the orphan in exchange for a simple meal. I mean, talk about a return on investment.
The boy's earthly reward is instantaneous. He goes from being a penniless laborer to one of the absolute wealthiest men in the city, earning the famous title of the Sudden Householder. His old master is so impressed by this sheer display of merit that he actually marries his own daughter to the boy. And eventually, King Pasenadi himself officially appoints the former orphan as a high-ranking noble in Sravasti.
Now, looking at this from a legal standpoint, this chaotic day of festival eating led the Buddha to draft another major rule. Monks were now officially forbidden from eating repeatedly at multiple feasts in a single day. Why? Because during times of famine, wasting a layperson's hard-earned, expensive food just because you already filled up on street snacks earlier is deeply disrespectful. Again, exceptions were made for actual illness or specific ceremonial times, but the core law was entirely about respecting the economics and the deep sacrifices of the working class.
Which brings us nicely to part 4, the true purpose of all these rules.
Ultimately, what this explainer shows us is that the Vinaya, the ancient monastic code, was not some set of arbitrary, cold laws drafted in a vacuum. Not at all. They were highly reactive, compassionate guidelines built entirely on real human mistakes. The Buddha was constantly balancing the spiritual elevation of his monks with the gritty, day-to-day realities of ancient society. He was protecting public trust when those monks gossiped on the riverboats. He was preventing waste and respecting hard work when he stopped monks from overeating. And he was showing deep, profound empathy for a poor boy's tears.
So I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on. Are modern public relations and community guidelines really that different from ancient Sravasti? Because when you strip away the robes in the ancient setting, human nature, our tendency to gossip, our jealousy over resources, our constant need for respected mediators to step in and restore order, it remains exactly the same. It really makes you wonder, the next time you see a massive modern community controversy, how would the ultimate crisis manager of ancient India have handled it?